There were 5 people executed in Washington. This is part 4 of the series. James Homer Elledge, August 28, 2001. Elledge was executed by lethal injection in Washington State Penitentiary for the murder of 47-year-old Eloise Jane Fitzner while on parole for another murder. Elledge committed robbery in 1964 in an Albuquerque, New Mexico Western Union office. He also abducted a female attendant during this heist. After serving a jail term in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and being granted release, he relocated to Seattle, Washington, where he killed hotel manager Bertha Lush in 1974 after a fight over a bill by striking her to death with a ball-peen hammer. He was granted 3 paroles throughout his term in jail for that offense. The most recent one took place in August of 1995. On April 18, 1998, Elledge, who was employed as a custodian at a church, invited Eloise Fitzner and her friend, who was only known as SC, into a Bible study room. He shut the door behind him, then took out a knife and bound the ankles and wrists of the 2 women. He turned SC towards the wall and covered her head with a sweater. SC heard someone struggle behind her and looked to see what was going on. Noticing this, Elledge turned her again to face the wall and threatened her that she would be next to be killed if she did not stay facing it. Elledge fatally stabbed Fitzner in the neck after first strangling her with his hands because he wasn't sure if she was dead. He hid the body, then kidnapped SC and took them home in Fitzner's vehicle. He molested SC in his house and then let her go the next day. She went straight to the police. 2 days later, Elledge was apprehended and made a confession. He entered a guilty plea to aggravated first-degree murder on May 27, 1998. He refused to allow his attorney to raise any defense during the penalty phase. In his own testimony, he stated, "There is a very wicked part of me, and this wicked part of me needs to die." Elledge was sentenced to death on July 28, 1998. On August 28, 2001, in Washington State Penitentiary, he gave up all of his rights to an appeal and was put to death by lethal injection. He was only the 4th person to be put to death in Washington State since the capital penalty was reinstated there in 1981. Elledge asked for a last meal of waffles, eggs, bacon, cereal, sweet rolls, and orange juice, but he refused to eat it. The last thing he actually ate was a breakfast consisting of eggs, toast, hash browns, apple juice, and coffee. He didn't have any final words. Cal Coburn Brown, September 10, 2010. Holly Washa, 21, was abducted by Brown in a hotel parking lot when he was on parole for a violent sexual offense. Brown threatened to kill her with a knife and forced her to drive or die. Later, he made her sit in the passenger seat against her will, tied her hands behind her back, and drove her to his neighboring motel. Holly was made to undress in his motel room. He then bound her to the bed and repeatedly essayed and tormented her for several hours. After stabbing Holly multiple times and stuffing her in the trunk of her car, Brown eventually abandoned the car in a parking lot and left the woman to bleed to death. Holly's body was discovered in her car's trunk a few days later. Following Holly's murder, Brown took off for Palm Springs, California, where he met up in a different hotel room with his next victim. This woman had her throat cut and was handcuffed by him, but somehow she lived to inform the authorities when Brown left the room. She survived. After being apprehended in the hotel parking lot, Brown immediately provided audio-taped confessions to the essay and attempted murder of this woman named Susan in California, as well as the murder of Holly Washa in Washington. In a long statement, Brown acknowledged that he understood Washa's family's animosity towards him, but he did not offer an apology. He said he hoped the execution would bring them closure and that he had forgiven their hatred. He added that he had no complaints regarding his treatment there and that the prison staff had been quite professional. Brown, however, objected to the unequal sentencing, claiming that murderers who had killed a lot more people, like Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, received life sentences. He said, "I only killed one victim. I cannot really see that there is true justice. Hopefully, sometime in the future, that gets straightened out." Brown's final words were, "Thank you, God bless you, God bless my family." Dan Satterberg, the prosecutor for King County, as well as Holly Washa's brother, sister, and father, were present for the execution. Following his remarks, Brown, who was tied to a gurney and laying on his back, glanced up at the tubes that protruded from the wall and were attached to his body. His lips quivered and his chest heaved 3 times before becoming motionless after the medicine was given. Brown spoke over the phone with his family and attorney, but they were not present during the execution. The state Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals all denied requests to halt the execution. Governor Chris Gregoire turned down his request for clemency. Brown had been incarcerated on death row for 16 years, and this was Washington's first execution since 2001. Brown had maintained that his mental illness should have prevented his execution and that it was not given enough consideration at his sentencing. Court documents indicated that he had bipolar disorder. Witnesses said Brown died about a minute and a half after the drugs were administered. He was pronounced dead by prison officials at 12:56 a.m. Up until October 11, 2018, when a state Supreme Court decision ruled the state's capital punishment statute to be void and out of application, Washington continued to apply the death penalty. The capital sentence was declared illegal by the court because of racial bias, but this ruling did not invalidate the death penalty as a whole. Rather, it mandated that the statute be changed to remove any racial bias. The state executed 78 individuals between 1904 and 2010. Cal Coburn Brown was the final person to be executed there. Governor Jay Inslee officially abolished the death penalty in Washington state and withdrew the death penalty's components from state law in April of 2023. The jury's decision had to be unanimous when the prosecution requested the death penalty. Even if one juror voted against the death penalty, a life sentence would be imposed in the event of a hung jury at the sentencing portion of the trial. Retrials were not allowed. Regarding death sentences, only the governor possessed the authority to grant clemency. The method of death that the prisoners wanted, a hanging or a lethal injection, was up for selection. The default technique was lethal injection if the prisoner did not make a decision. The last state with a working gallows was Washington. Delaware took theirs apart in 2003. Because of his potential for decapitation as a result of his obesity, Mitchell Roop sought to have his execution reversed on the grounds that it was cruel and unusual. The court decided that there was not enough scientific evidence to support hanging didn't pose the risk of beheading, so Roop's sentence was commuted to life in prison. A total of 110 executions have been carried out in the state and its predecessor territories since 1849. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.